My name is Charlie Coles. This is my thesis presentation that I presented last week, titled Automated Vehicles, A Guide for Planners and Policymakers. If you have any questions, we'll wait until the very end to address those. The presentation will be about 45 to 50 minutes. There's a lot of information to cover, and I know it might be kind of hard to digest at first, but if you have any questions outside of the time that we have allotted to discuss, I'd be happy to meet with you privately, over phone, email, whatever it might be. In the meantime, you can always tweet to me at @CharlieColes. Maybe we can also put in Caltrans HQ and try to get some publicity on this little stunt we'll be doing here today to let them know that we are here talking about automated vehicles. So if you have a Twitter account, feel free to take some pictures and post it up online. So one thing is clear. The next 5 to 10 years are going to be the most disruptive we've ever seen in the history of personal transportation. Now, planning and policymaking is a future-oriented activity, and so my objective was to try to understand how automated vehicles are going to disrupt the system per se, so that we may become better planners and policymakers for the near-term future. As with any report, there were some limitations. One of the first ones being time. Over the last year and a half, I was developing this thesis, and during that time there was a lot of information that became available, and as one human being working on this project, it was sometimes hard to go through all the different information that was surfacing at that point in time. In addition, the resources that I had available, a second major component of this research involved interviewing thought leaders in automation, transportation, planning, and policymaking. I started thinking to myself, okay, if I were to go out and interview 100 different people, how much more value would I get out of that? And trying to narrow the focus as much as possible, looking at specifically transportation-related impacts and really the mobility of human beings, started thinking to myself, okay, how much more value would I really get out of interviewing another 95 people? While it would be really interesting to get a lot of different perspectives, just the amount of time that I had and the resources, had to try to limit it as much as possible. So the presentation will follow this basic structure. It will begin with a review of literature, move into the interviews, and then overall conclusions, which includes implications for planners and policymakers, and then recommendations for future research. Before we begin, I want to start by clearly defining what we mean by vehicle automation. Now, automation in its most basic sense is the ability for a computer technology to sense the roadway environment and then go ahead and handle some portion of the driving experience. But the Society of Automotive Engineers has clearly defined 6 different levels of automation, from level 0 to level 5, that I'm going to walk through now, because it's actually very important that we understand these key differences between each of these levels, as it is going to be something that I discuss in more detail throughout the presentation. So starting off with level 0, this is where complete and sole control of the vehicle is handled by the human driver at all times. Moving to level 1, this is what we call driver's assistance. This is where the lane holding and lane changing maneuvers of the vehicle are handled by the human driver. However, we see the introduction of certain technologies like traction control to help keep the vehicle on the roadway in certain conditions. Level 2, partial automation. This is where now the technology has reached a point where lane changing and lane holding capabilities can now be performed by the technology. However, a key component here is that the human driver needs to remain completely aware of its surroundings and the system. Just in case something were to go wrong, they can quickly grab hold of the steering wheel and maneuver through any kind of issue the technology was having. Now, the big jump from level 2 to now level 3 is at this point the technology has reached a stage where human drivers can take their attention off the roadway and focus on other things. Now, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, they actually have a defined level of automations that combines level 4 and level 5 into one definition, just level 4. I think the Society of Automotive Engineers does a really important job, does a really key thing here by separating level 4 and level 5. The basic thing here is that now the technology has reached a point where vehicles are essentially 100% automated, where we no longer need steering wheels or foot pedals to control the vehicle, so you can completely remove the human being from the component. However, at level 4, these are vehicles that can only operate in controlled environments, specifically controlled environments, right? Whereas level 5, this is essentially what Google is looking to achieve. This is a vehicle that can handle 100% all roadways, environments, and all driving conditions. So the big part of my research in the very beginning started with a review of literature. So not only was I interested in looking at peer-reviewed professional journals from respected authors and researchers, I also wanted to try to get another perspective of what was being discussed in the media, magazines, newspapers, whatever it might be, to try to get a more comprehensive understanding of what was being discussed, not only from the professional side of things, but also in the media, which is what a lot of content is being produced at that time over the last year, and that's also what a lot of people are actually reading more frequently. Now, in my report, or in my thesis, I made a comprehensive list of all the advantages and disadvantages that people were basically speculating on as to the result of vehicle automation, the implementation of vehicle automation. Now, this isn't the complete list here, but it just highlights an important thing that I noted during the review of literature, that there were some advantages that people were speculating on. For example, the potential for automated vehicles to improve health and public safety, better productivity and quality of life, and reduce congestion. Now, at the same time, and oftentimes in the same reports and the same research, I was finding some disadvantages that, again, people were speculating on that actually contradicted a lot of the advantages that people were discussing. For example, worsened security, safety, and public health, increased total trip time, and increases in automobile dominance, congestion, and VMT. Now, this was really interesting to me. It's one of my first discoveries in my research process, and it really motivated me to try to do a lot more to try to understand why we were seeing these contradicting statements, to try to more clearly define what we can anticipate to see in the near future, right? So this led me to my first key finding, which was the impacts of vehicle automation on roadway congestion, automobile dominance, and VMT cannot be accurately predicted at this time. Now, this was a really interesting finding for me, and I decided to list these 3 specific factors here: congestion, automobile dominance, and VMT, because in my mind, they're things that we're trying to improve, we're trying to get away from, and if there's a potential for automated vehicles to actually make things worse, then is that really a road we want to go down? So in trying to understand and answer this first key finding, or this major question in my mind, I decided to look back at different modes of transportation, specifically 6 modes of transportation, back in an era where the walking and horse buggy ruled the roadways, to the introduction of the omnibus, subways, commuter rail, streetcars, and then of course the introduction of the automobile. And there were a lot of interesting findings and lessons to be gained from the introduction of these different modes, all the way from when they were first introduced to when they were fully adopted by society. And we saw some pretty dramatic changes there in terms of how people move, where people chose to live, the shapes of cities, etc. But for the lack of this discussion, I'm going to focus on one key finding, and that's basically that, well, these introductions of new technologies or innovations in transportation really followed the standard innovation adoption life cycle, right? So when a new mode of transportation becomes available, it's generally expensive, and it's really only going to be affordable to the more affluent who can risk making that investment in this mode of transportation. And over time, we see the technology improve, the cost goes down, there's less risk associated with that purchase, and now more people are buying into it. And so this is just a typical adoption that we see in all technology. And so this led me to my second key finding, was that vehicle automation technology may first become available to more affluent households who can afford to pay the higher cost of travel. Now, this was, again, another really interesting finding for me, because a lot of the discussions that were being noted in the research was that, well, automated vehicles can provide mobility, accessibility, improved quality of life for people who don't have that already, or don't have good access to public transit, or could really receive an economic benefit from having easy access to places of work. And so seeing this trend actually made me start thinking about the potential equitable issues with this technology. And maybe it's something that we could try to reverse in the future, or maybe it's not, but it's something that I wanted to look into more and something that I even discuss a little bit further. Now, while also looking at the history and past modes of transportation, I felt it was important to look at the generational trends that we're looking at today and we're seeing change today in society. Because after all, this automated vehicle is going to be deployed in this context. So I think it was important to understand. And what I found was, well, that millennials are multimodal. They're interested in shared-based transportation services. They're attracted to leverage technology for transit. And they choose how they get around based on their budget and their lifestyle. And while this may not seem to be directly related to vehicle automation, to me what it told me was that if vehicle automation were to be deployed, it's likely something that this massive generation will buy into, will accept, and consider as another option in their transportation system. Car sharing. Now, car sharing was something that came up a lot in the research. And if you don't know what car sharing is, it's essentially a shared-based transportation service where you can rent a vehicle for as little as an hour up to multiple days, just like any other car rental agency, except with the key difference that these cars are parked in dense urban areas, generally, where they have access to a lot of users, and you can reserve them with your phone or with your computer online. Now, car sharing was actually interesting, and how it was specifically related to vehicle automation was that specifically level 5 automation has the potential to enable a new mode of urban mobility by facilitating car sharing. Now, car sharing is currently faced with a pretty significant challenge, and we see this in bike sharing as well, where there's a challenge of recirculating these vehicles as they're moved around. And so basically how it works is someone will rent the vehicle and then have to bring it back to that original parking spot. If the vehicle has the potential to recirculate itself or maybe even travel a little bit further distance to become close enough to another cohort of individuals that it could potentially serve, there's potentially a lot of value in that. And so specifically I want to highlight here that level 5 is required in order to do that. Any of the intermediate levels of automation really aren't going to be able to achieve that. Maybe level 4, but just for the sake of simplifying the discussion, we'll just go ahead and say level 5 is going to be required to facilitate car sharing. In addition, car sharing has been actually shown to reduce VMT, car ownership, and car usage. So again, that's another important factor. If vehicle automation can facilitate car sharing, then maybe these inconsistencies that we're finding will lean more towards benefits of society in the form of reducing car usage and VMT and car ownership. Now, this basically set me up for the next phase in my research. And the review of literature really gave me the background and the context to develop a series of questions and topics that I wanted to discuss with these industry leaders in policymaking, planning, transportation, and vehicle automation, and have really intelligent conversations where I could start to look at these holes in arguments that people were making in existing research, even peer-reviewed research, and try to understand more about this industry and really try to get a good grasp of what's going to be happening here in the near future and then also the long-term future. So the first key finding, if you remember, I talked about these inconsistencies between the advantages and disadvantages that people were speculating on, right? Well, one of the first key findings that was really interesting actually helped explain why we're seeing those inconsistencies. And it's really quite simple. It's, well, the impacts of vehicle automation differ depending on one's vision of what the automation means, how it is implemented, what the automation does, and where it operates. Now, it's quite simple, right? If you can imagine that automated vehicles are going to be this Google-style car that can go anywhere, or if you're someone that imagine it's going to be a driverless shuttle that only moves at 15 miles an hour in a designated area, or if you just think that it's just the autopilot function that's just going to be installed in private vehicles to give you the flexibility of driving in an automated or not driving at all. Now, you're going to come up with radically different outcomes and impacts under each of those visions. And there are a lot of different visions that people are coming up with. So it really kind of explains why there's so many inconsistencies in the research. And it also underlines the importance of clearly defining what automation level you're talking about. And not only that, but what vision you're talking about as well, because each level of automation can be applied in many different ways. Key finding number 2. The current limitations of vehicle automation to perform all aspects of the dynamic driving task in all driving conditions makes it difficult to move from level 4 to level 5. Remember, level 4 automation is under controlled environments, completely driverless. Level 5 is like the Google car. What this is basically saying is that level 5 is extremely difficult to achieve. It's going to take many, many years before the technology reaches a point where we can drive basically from coast to coast, 100% fully automated. People are speculating 10 years, 20 years. The experts that I talked to more realistically were saying 50 to 70 years. And so this was really interesting, right? Right? You're upset. I know, I was too. And I was like, I need to know why you're telling me this. I need to know what you're so confident. What do you know that I don't know that makes you so confident in this discussion, in this key point that you're introducing to me? And so one of the things that we talked about was that, well, look at your cell phone, look at your tablet, look at your laptop. Would you trust this device to operate for more than 3 million hours without any kind of a serious flaw? And I'll get to 3 million hours here in a second as to why that is, but think about it. In an automated vehicle, if some kind of a hiccup or glitch happens in the technology, there can be some potentially drastic consequences with that, right? The loss of a life, injury, that is just not going to be acceptable, and that's where we get the 3 million hours for. Start by quantifying how safe is driving in the United States, and if you look in terms of exposure and the number of hours of exposure, you get that fatalities occur once in every 3.3 million hours. That's where we get over 3 million hours, actually over 3.3 million hours. So think of this as like the threshold, right? NHTSA and any kind of federal level regulations are not going to allow a new technology to come out that is going to make safety worse on public roadways. That is just not going to happen. And even if we were to break even and reach the same level of 3.3 million hours, that's just not going to be acceptable either. We need to really be pushing the limits. And this is what these industry leaders are saying. We might see some issues when mixing with a mixture of fleets. So if we have automated vehicles with human driver vehicles, there might be some issues there that we need to work through. But overall, I mean, this is going to be like the baseline standard to actual deployment of these level 5 automated vehicles. To reiterate the importance of level 5 automation, it's required to have any effect on car sharing mobility and quality of life. Now, I've already talked about this, but this was something that again came up in the interviews, that this is really important, right? The importance and underlying the importance of level 5 automation. Once we reach level 5 automation, there's suddenly a ton of opportunities to improve a lot of the issues that as transportation planners we face today. Key finding number 4, this is a cool one as well. Human drivers may never be allowed to disengage their attention from a partially automated vehicle. Now basically what this is saying is that level 3 automation, if you remember, that's where the technology has reached a point where human drivers can disengage and focus on other things. I suggest that should never happen. There's no way that should ever be allowed on public roadways. And here's why. We can look towards aviation. There's a lot of really interesting things happening in aviation right now, especially with next gen, and they're essentially trying to do the exact same thing that these automated vehicles are doing. But let's look at the key differences here. In an airplane, you can travel in 3 dimensions, and you're often separated by thousands, more often by miles, from different aircrafts. There are highly trained pilots, more than one, generally 2 or 3, that operate these aircrafts. And we actually saw about 5 years ago that there were observed to be an increase in crashes due to skill deterioration. And this is going to be something that's going to be any kind of a question with any autopilot function. Now again, autopilot is a key word here, especially in aviation, because if you have highly skilled pilots monitoring the system and the conditions around the aircraft, that's like thinking this is a level 2 automation. That's kind of like level 2 autopilot functions. That's kind of what we have in the new Tesla right now. But bringing it back to the vehicle roadway and the key differences there, vehicles travel oftentimes in a matter of feet from each other. 2 seconds, right? People started tailgating a little bit more recently. And at high speeds, 65 mile an hour plus highway speeds, a couple seconds away from each other, there's a lot that can go wrong really quickly. And to expect a human being to disengage from whatever they're doing and re-engage into a vehicle in that amount of time, that's really complicated. That becomes a huge issue that's really complicated that it seems like a lot of people are trying to address with these human factors interactions. How does the technology communicate with the human driver that they need to grab hold of the wheel and take control of this technology because it can't handle anything or can't handle something that's coming up ahead? It's a really complicated space. People are focusing a lot of attention on this. In addition, kind of highlighting that point, research actually shows that there's definitive evidence that it takes average person 7 seconds to re-engage into a vehicle control in order to perform whatever driving maneuver that needs to be handled. 7 seconds on a highway, traveling 65 miles an hour. There's a lot that can go wrong in 7 seconds. And again, that's why I say level 3 will just not be allowed. Conclusions. I'm going to run through these really quickly. We've already seen these in the presentation, but I just want to repeat them so that they can hopefully stick in your minds and will be a nice little refresher as we move into implications for planners and policymakers, as well as some recommendations for future research. So the impacts of vehicle automation differ depending on one's vision of what the automation means, how it is implemented, what the automation does, and where it operates. The current limitations of vehicle automation to perform all aspects of the dynamic driving task make it difficult to move from level 4 to level 5. Level 5 automation is required to have any effect on car sharing, mobility, and quality of life. And again, human drivers may never be allowed to disengage their attention from a partially automated vehicle, and specifically in applications where drivers are expected to re-engage their attention under safety critical situations. Now this leads to probably why a lot of you are all here today. Well, what does this mean for planners and policymakers? So in my report, I actually developed a future scenario. Over the next 5 to 10 years, what can we expect vehicle automation to look like? And if we know what vehicle automation looks like, then we can start to inform policy, and planners can now start making more intelligent recommendations for what their communities, respective areas should be doing in anticipation for this new technology. So the report goes into much more detail as to what this future scenario is, but just to highlight some of the key attributes, we already see level 2 technology on the road today, so we're more likely to see more innovations in that sense. I would suggest that we're going to see level 2 technology, automation, used in truck platoons. Now this is something that I don't discuss too much in my research, but if we are talking about the next 5 to 10 years, this is actually one of the more realistic applications of this technology. And one other thing, that if you look into aviation, they actually have both Boeing and Airbus, they have different philosophies on automation. There's hard automation and soft automation. Hard automation is essentially like a limit. So imagine it's essentially like some kind of a computer-controlled program that would disallow you to push the vehicle past a certain limit. So no matter what you do, you're not going to be able to override that system. Whereas soft automation, you can think of as cruise control. The second that you put your foot on the brake pedal, it's going to release control and hand everything back over to the human driver. I suggest that due to some of the issues that we see in aviation with hard automation, and also some other hard automation technologies that we see in vehicles today, level 2 technology will most likely come in the form of soft automation, and we can see applications and even early applications of this in the form of truck platoons utilizing what's called longitudinal cooperative adaptive cruise control. Now essentially what this does is it allows vehicles to, it controls the longitudinal, right? So it controls the straight line movements of the vehicle. Driving the actual steering of the vehicles might be needed to be performed by the human drivers, but controlling the speeds of the vehicles and getting them to travel very close to each other could be a potential early application of this. Moving on from level 2, like I said, we're probably just going to skip level 3 altogether, especially in the near term. Maybe if we figure something out way later with that humans factor research, potentially there could be something. I suggest that that's just going to be avoided altogether with the safety implications. But moving on to level 4, some early applications that we're going to see is actually in the form of these driverless type shuttles, right? So we're already seeing these. There are some early test applications being released, 3 locations in the United States, as well as in in the United Kingdom and in England. They're doing some tests on this type of application where these level 4 technologies are able to operate at a slow speed in mainly pedestrian environments. And it's really a nice way to just transport people back and forth. Now, an early application of this could potentially be first and last mile solutions. That's where a lot of people are saying this is where this technology is going to be utilized. It wouldn't necessarily require big investments in infrastructure. You can really just dedicate maybe an extra lane. That may be kind of complicated, but in terms of the amount of benefit that could be potentially received from that, and there's not many risks associated with that either, at least when people are able to see at this point. There's a great opportunity to potentially serve underserved communities to public transit, right? So people could really benefit from this direct link to major public transit lines. Now, going on a little bit beyond that, I really like the idea of like a level 4 BRT application. That might be stretching it a little bit over the next 5 to 10 years. And there's a lot of complications with that. But I think in general, especially in high capacity areas, introducing a BRT type system with level 4 automation could be really interesting and really help serve and relieve a lot of congestions that we see on major highways. Now, I haven't talked about this yet, but I do want to highlight the importance of connectivity. Now, if you don't know what connectivity is, it's basically what they call V2V, vehicle to vehicle, and then V to I, which is vehicle to infrastructure connection. And now this is basically technology that allows the vehicles to communicate with surrounding vehicles as well as the infrastructure around it. So automation, it's really just sensing whatever it can see, right? So it's limited to whatever is in its direct line of sight. So automated vehicles can't see around corners, whereas connected vehicles can. And in aviation, we're seeing this with NextGen. Actually, they're going through the same process where in NextGen, they're installing all of the required technology to pinpoint each aircraft location in the air and on the ground by 7 feet using satellite technology. And they're going through this process now, and it's taken them a very long time. They're going through that connected process first as an enabler of the end-all of actually fully automated aircraft travel. This is the same thing with roadway automation. We're going to need to become connected before we can reach that next step of level 5 automation. There may be applications, like I said, level 2 automation, we're already seeing on the road. Level 4 automation we're going to be seeing very soon. There are some ways that we can use the technology and utilize it very quickly in order to see a lot of benefits and help achieve a lot of goals that we're looking to accomplish. However, at the same time, while that's going on and that technology is developing, connectivity needs to also be improving as well. And so agencies, local, state, regional agencies, they should be considering pretty significant investments into connectivity right now with the end goal of eventually enabling an automated fleet. And again, this would be the end vision. While this may take 50 to 70 years to achieve, connectivity could help us achieve this a little bit faster. It's going to be a combination of a few different technologies, right? There's a couple different technologies that the Google car uses to sense the roadway environment, and then adding that level of connectivity can really help reduce or increase the precision of location of each vehicle. So implications for planners and policymakers. Overall, I think that there's a big need for an education and outreach initiative to help bring people's awareness up on vehicle automation. When I first started this research, I had thought that within a couple of years we're going to have a driverless taxi system where I can open up my phone, reserve a car, and it's going to show up to my front door and take me to wherever I want. It took me a year and a half plus to come to a lot of these realizations that I found, and I think it's pretty safe to say that a lot of people that don't have the time to dedicate this much energy in trying to understand this topic aren't going to be as well informed as I am. And so hopefully a lot of the realizations that I made in this presentation help you realize the importance of bringing up people's awareness and making sure that they know what are the capabilities and limitations of this technology in the near term. Because if we can understand that, then we would become better planners and policymakers in supporting this technology. Again, become proactive, involved in vehicle automation, rather than just passive recipients of change. We live in a really interesting time right now with cell phone technology and the advent of the computer, where we can communicate information very quickly across the globe between each other. Back when these past innovations in transportation, even when the automobile was first created, we didn't have that. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity now in the evolution of human beings that we can anticipate these negative impacts and try to push this technology from the bottom up in a way that is not going to result in those negative impacts, and really try to maximize these benefits and try to avoid those negative consequences. So on that note, some things that I think should be done right away are actually to create a task force that's responsible for organizing discussions, educating the public and stakeholders on advancements in automation. There's a lot that's changing, a lot of new programs coming up from the federal government, or coming down from the federal government, that are supporting this industry, as well as these task force should be responsible for providing updates on policy reforms from higher governments. We're about 4 months away from when NHTSA had said that they're going to be providing a universal strategy for policy at the state level. So that's going to be 4 months, as you know, is going to be here rather quickly. Creating a task force, starting these discussions early, educating your staff on not only automation, while this was the focus, but also connectivity. Hopefully, I highlight how important connectivity will be for automation, and just kind of start the discussion, right? Become aware of what's going on in the industry, because it is going to be something that's going to be showing up here rather quickly. State, regional, local agencies should provide flexibility in their policy to allow for automated vehicles that enable first and last mile solutions and freight transportation applications. Now, if you remember, this was really a 5 to 10 year strategy that I was looking at. Implementing flexible policy is something that can be done rather effectively, so that as these new applications of this technology arise or are invented, at least the policy isn't going to prevent those applications from being realized in certain situations. So flexibility in policy is where we need to be right now. Just simply not including policy in any kind of documents really shouldn't be an excuse, just because we're not quite aware of what this technology is going to be. There's research out there, and it's just going to take the time to really fully understand what are the limitations of this technology, what are we most likely to see, and then develop policy off of those. Let's try to think of ways that we can leverage new technology and transportation to make vehicles and the users of the system more connected in order to achieve some goals like improved mobility, efficiency, and equality. Again, highlighting the importance of connected vehicle technology, V2V and V2I. This should be seen as maybe even a primary focus for the adoption of automated vehicles, because as we've seen in aviation, this is going to be the first step before we can realize a fully automated system. Now, future research. If you haven't noticed by now, the transitional period to level 5 automation is observed to create some new problems that are being under-addressed in existing research. A lot of what I read online, in the media, as well as in peer-reviewed journals, really this focus on a vision of level 5 automation, fully automated system. And as I've shown you today, that's 50, 70 years down the road. Maybe it's nice to think about and just imagine what a fully automated system would look like, but realistically we need to bring things down to earth and focus on these intermediate levels of automation that we can actually start now using in the near term and start to realize some of these benefits of this technology. Pretty much basically what I just said, but planners, engineers, and research should focus on understanding the effects of intermediate levels of automation, but in addition, looking at it from a multi-dimensional assessment. So you could look at it from a safety perspective, mobility, equality, accessibility, and no matter where you look at it from, it's going to pull the eventual outcome of that technology in a different direction. Maintaining a multi-dimensional assessment can really help us realize the bigger picture of things and help to implement this technology in a way that can overall benefit society. So we don't want to be part of the problem of integrating this technology into the marketplace. We want to be part of the solution. That's all I have for today. Thank you very much.